Gil Waters was a dear friend of mine. Like myself, he grew up in the Bronx. He had the ability and the good fortune of attending the Bronx High School of Science, one of the preeminent schools in the United States. And from there he went on to Yale, which certainly provided him with a wonderful education. And then he, through some great mystery, arrived here in Sarasota at a relatively young age. He spent 2 stints in the Navy during the course of his years, established himself in journalism and was working for the Herald Tribune for a period of time, but he had to give that up in order to support a growing family. Gil got involved in countless endeavors. He worked tirelessly as a developer and as a politician. He was a man of so very many talents. He was a good and dear friend, and I'm proud to have known him.
So many people have asked me, what about Gil Waters? What kind of person was he? And I was kind of lost for that, but I was talking to my youngest son who had a lot of dealings, financial dealings with Gil through the old Enterprise Bank and RBC, and he said, "Dad, all I can tell you is authentic." That's the way I would describe Gil.
The most vivid memories that I have of him are the lunches that I had with Gil. We frequently would have lunch to talk about the issues in Sarasota, and I would drive over to his condo at the Phoenix. Gil always came out to the car. Man, these looks are unforgettable. His hair was always kind of disheveled. I don't think he had taken a shower. He was unshaven. Oftentimes wore these t-shirts that I think they had to be 20, 25 years old, sort of faded. Wearing shorts and sneakers, but he'd climb in my Jeep and we'd head down to the Lox and Egg. He could clean himself up well, too. I talked about how he looked like a damn bum, but then, you turn around that night and go to some gala, and he is like one of the best dressed looking guys in the room.
Well, my dad, he's very, very handsome. In many ways, he was movie star handsome, but he was not so much a renegade, but he dressed the way he wanted. He had a nice beard part of the time, and he had the deep blue eyes, very striking, and he had a rhythm. People will talk about others moving to their own drum beat. My dad had his own rhythm, and he would sing quite a lot. He liked island music, and he listened to that quite a bit, and he'd click his fingers walking around town and get into a burst of song in the middle of a crowd or a restaurant. He was active. He loved boats. He loved the water. He was a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy. He had a tugboat, a ship, the USS Bannock.
The other thing I really liked about Gil was that he was a contrarian. He would not go along with the status quo. He always challenged the status quo, and he was always trying to think differently from the crowd. The guy absolutely was a man of his convictions, and when he believed that something was right, he was an incredible bulldog who would not give up.
Now, there was also a absolute tender side of this man who was a indomitable curmudgeon of a hurricane, with which right at the center of him, the eye of himself, was this incredibly good human who truly was interested in people and wanted to make a better life for so many other people. As I'm sure others have told you the stories of his great achievements in Sarasota, but really at the center, he cared, and I loved that.
First time that I met Gil was, had to be in the late 90s when we just started our business paper. And I had written an editorial critical of the Sarasota County Commission and its what I called anti-growth policies. Well, that rattled Gil's chain, and got a phone call, and he invited me to see him at his office. So this office was in some dumpy little cottage, and the inside of the place is this old, grungy-looking home.
Well, that's why Gil ended up in this building. Even though he was retiring, the bridge became an issue for Gil, a major issue, and he needed space to run a campaign to see that the fixed span got built. He was adamant that it was needed for all sorts of safety reasons and traffic reasons. The newspaper was very much against it, and there was a in addition to Gil's building the bridge campaign, there was the Bridge Too High faction that were campaigning against having a high bridge built. To approach it, he did grassroots. He started running ads in the newspaper, asking people to send in, I think it was $1 or $5, and then they would be entered into a subscription list with updates on the good bridge. He bought a condo that overlooked where the new bridge was going to go, very Brooklyn Bridge-esque, and he lived in that condo, watched the building of the entire bridge, and would go out there essentially every day and talk with the construction people.
Gil was having an 80th birthday on the roof of their condo, which overlooks the waterfront and also overlooks the bridge. Anyway, I was sitting back looking out on the spectacle of the bridge, and I said to myself, gee, be nice if we could have a plaque or sign put up on the bridge. So I asked Gil, and he said, well, he says, I want to be sure that the plaque would mention that there were 400 other people that got behind that bridge.
Yeah, it wasn't his crowning event. It was just one of the last ones. And it's one of the ones when modern Sarasota was paying attention. Back when my dad got started, it was a different bunch of spaces around Sarasota. I would say that starting an insurance company from scratch for a person that didn't have any background in insurance was a pretty staggering feat for a guy that didn't study insurance. Really, that adventuring spirit that he had and tenacious approach was what he did with almost everything. So he came to Sarasota with a journalism passion that spun off into all the projects that he did. And the bridge was one of the last ones, but definitely was one of many.
One of the neat things about Gil is he was so creative, and he was creative in his gift planning. He loved to do things in a smart way to have the greatest impact. And so as we would sit and figure out the best plan to actually be able to get the most money to make the greatest difference, that was even more exciting. Not just for Gil, but for so many people that have benefited from that creativity, that strength of thinking. So philanthropy is, as we used to say, it's not just giving, it's smart giving. And Gil did a lot of smart giving.
Dad he worked a lot. He had a theory that we should work 8 hours and sleep 8 hours and play 8 hours. He worked really hard. He was very focused, honest to the core, knew himself well, and was quite convinced and confident in his visions. So he had a very strong work ethic. He thought it was an essential part of everyone's life.
He had a way of expressing with his eyes enough to do a dissertation with. Everything that he did in his life was to improve everything that he saw in front of him. He was not the kind of person that pondered on looking back, was always looking forward. That was abundantly clear from the first day I was with him until the last day of his life.
Going back to when Gil was the city commissioner and had always been involved in city planning, there was a whole list of items that had been recommended, and that one by one these projects had been done. The moving of City Hall from the Bayfront to its present location, the building of the Bayfront Drive and downtown Marina and Island Park, the creation of the Purple Shell, as Gil would call it, the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall, the building of the parking garages downtown at State Street and Palm Avenue, and of course the bridge. One of the last items on the list was the walkability of downtown and the mobility access to downtown. And what Gil had long envisioned was taking Main Street, having it made into a walking boulevard, having the Skyway walkover over to Marina Jacks, over across 41. The bollards would close off Main Street so that during the day it would be walking territory, and for service deliveries the bollards would retract. Service trucks could use Main Street at night, and this was his last dream, and would have completed what he saw back in the 60s and the 70s as making downtown Sarasota a true walking city.
I would say that his influence of his trips is very high, because we went to Europe, we went all over the world, and everywhere there are pedestrian malls, and he actually wanted to do one even in the 50s. Of course, he was much too early in his vision, but he had always his eyes open, and he said, well, wouldn't that be great to have in Sarasota? Look at this walkway and look at this bridge, this overpass. And that was, he always got his inspiration from looking around and seeing beautiful places full with people. And of course, then he came home, and every time he tried to explain it, it didn't go that well, because people didn't know what he was talking. He just had, his vision was, as we speak, really 50 years ahead of time. Now I think we're ready. We're ready because Sarasota is really now a blooming, a young city. It's growing, and I think we're ready for his plans.
He was determined to get that done before the end of his time, and had even brought down to me this proposed advertising campaign that he wanted to get started, had it all made out, designed, had the card where people could sign up and be part of another one of the Gil Waters campaigns to make Sarasota a better place.
I think he was really a very special man, and unfortunately, I don't think they make people like him anymore.